Emma Thompson wiped the dust from her hands as she looked round her grandmother's old bedroom. The 17-year-old girl felt her heart breaking as she packed away memories from the only place that had ever felt like home. Her grandmother, Rose, sat quietly in her wheelchair by the window. The old woman watched Emma with confused eyes that no longer recognized the world round her. The dementia had taken so much from her, stealing away the sharp mind and warm laugh that Emma remembered from her childhood. But sometimes, just sometimes, Emma could still see glimpses of the grandmother who had raised her during those magical summer holidays when her parents were too busy working to care for her. The afternoon sun streamed through the dusty curtains, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Emma had spent countless hours in this room as a child, listening to her grandmother's stories and playing with old toys that had been kept in the wardrobe for decades. Now everything had to be packed away and sold. The house was too big for Rose to manage, and the care home where she would live had no space for a lifetime of memories. "I don't understand why we have to sell the house, Nan," Emma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She held up an old photograph of herself and Rose baking cookies in the kitchen downstairs. "This is our home. This is where all our best memories are." Rose smiled gently but said nothing. Her mind was traveling somewhere far away, somewhere Emma couldn't follow. The doctors had explained that the disease would get worse, that there would be more days when Rose didn't recognize anyone at all. Emma tried to be strong, but the thought of losing her grandmother completely made her chest feel tight and her eyes burn with tears. Emma's parents had tried to be understanding, but they were always so busy with work and bills and grown-up problems. They didn't understand that this house wasn't just a building to Emma. It was the place where she had learned to read, where she had been comforted after nightmares, where she had felt truly loved and accepted. At school, Emma often felt invisible and awkward, but here with her grandmother, she had always felt special. As Emma lifted a heavy box filled with old books, the floorboard beneath her feet creaked loudly. She had walked on this floor thousands of times during her visits, running back and forth between the bedroom and the kitchen, playing hide and seek in the long hallways. But today something felt different about that particular board. She set the box down and knelt on the worn carpet. Emma pressed the floorboard with her hand, and to her surprise, it moved slightly. The wood was old and warped, and this section seemed looser than the rest. Her heart began to beat faster as she realized that the board might actually be loose on purpose. She worked her fingers round the edges until she could lift it completely. In the dark space below, something glinted in the afternoon light that streamed through the bedroom window. Emma reached down carefully, afraid that whatever was hidden there might fall deeper into the space between the floors. Her fingers touched something small and metal, and she pulled out a small brass key tied with a faded blue ribbon that had once been bright but was now pale with age. Wrapped round the key was a yellowed piece of paper that looked like it had been there for many years. Emma's hands trembled as she untied the ribbon and unfolded the note. The paper was soft and fragile, and she was afraid it might tear. In her late grandfather's familiar handwriting, she read the words that made her heart skip. "For the dreamer who needs to remember, love always, Grandpa William." Tears filled Emma's eyes as she stared at the message. Her grandfather had passed away 5 years ago, when she was only 12 years old. She remembered him, a kind man who always had time to listen to her problems, and who never made her feel silly for the things that worried her. He had been the one person who always believed in her, who told her that she was smart and talented and that she would do wonderful things when she grew up. But how could he have known that she would find this key now, when she needed hope more than ever? How could he have known that she would be here, in this room, feeling so lost and alone? Emma clutched the key tightly in her palm, feeling the cool metal against her skin. For the first time in months, since the doctors had first explained about her grandmother's illness and the family had started talking about selling the house, Emma felt a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. Rose looked over at Emma from her wheelchair, and for a brief, precious moment, her eyes cleared and became sharp and aware again. "He always said you were special, dear," she whispered in a voice that sounded more like the grandmother Emma remembered. "He always said you would find it when you needed it most." Emma stared at her grandmother, then down at the mysterious key in her palm. The metal was warm now from her touch, and the ribbon seemed to shimmer in the sunlight. What had her grandfather hidden for her to find, and why now? When she felt so broken and scared about the future, over the next few weeks, Emma became completely focused on solving the mystery of her grandfather's key. The small brass object had become the most important thing in her world, more precious than anything else she owned. Every day after school, instead of going home to do her homework like she used to, Emma would grab her old blue bicycle from the garage and pedal as fast as she could to her grandmother's house. The house felt different now that it was mostly empty. Most of the furniture had already been moved to storage or given away to charity. Emma's footsteps echoed in the hollow rooms as she searched through the remaining boxes, opened every cupboard door, and crawled into forgotten corners that hadn't been disturbed for years. She looked behind picture frames and a loose carpet, edges and inside old vases that had collected dust for decades. Her parents, John and Margaret, watched their daughter's behavior with growing concern. They could see that Emma was becoming obsessed with something, but they didn't understand what was driving her to spend so much time at the old house, her schoolwork, which had never been her strongest point anyway, began to suffer even more than usual. "Emma, you're falling behind in your studies," her mother Margaret said gently one evening as Emma came home late again, her clothes dusty and her hair full of cobwebs. "Your teachers are asking questions about your assignments. Maybe it's time to focus on more important things than whatever you're looking for in that old house." Her father John nodded in agreement, setting down his newspaper with a concerned expression. "Your mother's right. Love, I know you miss your grandmother's house, but you can't let it take over your whole life. You need to think about your future, about your exams and getting into a good college." But Emma couldn't explain to her parents why the key was so important to her. How could she tell them that it was the only thing that made her feel connected to something bigger than her daily problems? How could she make them understand that the key represented hope in a world that seemed to be falling apart around her? Emma had always struggled to fit in at school. She was too quiet for the popular girls, too shy for the drama club, and not athletic enough for the sports teams. She spent most lunch breaks sitting alone in the library, reading books and wishing she could disappear. With her grandmother's illness getting worse each day, Emma felt more isolated and alone than ever before in her life. The search through her grandfather's belongings revealed surprises that Emma had never expected. Hidden in the bottom drawer of his old wooden desk, she found a collection of leather-bound journals that she had never seen before. The pages were filled with William's neat handwriting. But instead of the grocery lists and appointment reminders she expected, Emma discovered page after page of sketches and mysterious notes. The sketches showed detailed drawings of the house from different angles, with strange markings and symbols drawn in the margins. There were arrows pointing to various rooms, and cryptic notes written in pencil that had faded over time. Most intriguing of all were the repeated references to something William called the room where dreams live. He had written about music, constantly, mentioning songs that needed to be finished and gifts that should never be forgotten or wasted. Emma spent hours trying to decode her grandfather's journal entries, but many of them seemed like riddles. He wrote about hidden treasures that sing and walls that hold secrets of the heart. The more she read, the more convinced she became that William had built or created something special in the house. Something that the key would unlock. Emma's grandmother Rose had good days and bad days, and Emma learned to recognize the difference quickly. On the bad days, Rose would stare blankly at the wall and not respond when Emma spoke to her. But on the good days, when her mind was clearer, Rose would sometimes mention things about William that gave Emma hope. He was always building something in that house, Rose said one afternoon as she sat by the window in a wheelchair, watching the birds in the garden outside, always creating beautiful things with his hands. He said music could heal broken hearts, could bring people together when nothing else would work. Emma felt her own heart aching as she listened to her grandmother's words. Her grandfather had been a man of many talents. She remembered him fixing broken toys and building shelves, but she had never known about any love for music. Why had he kept this part of himself secret from the family? And what did any of this have to do with the brass key that now hung on a chain round Emma's neck, hidden under her school uniform? Even Emma's best friend Lucy began to worry about her strange behavior. Lucy tried repeatedly to convince Emma to come to the cinema on weekends or go shopping at the mall like they used to do. But Emma's mind was completely focused on her search. "You're becoming weird, Emma," Lucy said with frustration after Emma declined another invitation. "All you think about is that old house and some stupid key. There's a whole world out there, you know." But Emma couldn't give up, even when she felt like she was running out of places to search and her family was running out of patience with her obsession. On a rainy Saturday morning in late October, Emma sat alone in her grandfather's old study, feeling more defeated than she had ever felt in her entire life. The rain drummed steadily against the windows, creating a sad rhythm that matched her mood perfectly. She had been searching for weeks now, going through every room, every closet, every possible hiding place she could imagine. The brass key felt cold and completely useless in her hand as she turned it over and over between her fingers. The study had always been William's favorite room in the house. Emma remembered how he would sit in his big leather chair, reading books and writing in his journals while she played quietly on the carpet nearby. The room still smelled faintly of his pipe tobacco and the old books that lined the walls from floor to ceiling. But now, like everything else in the house, it felt empty and sad. Emma slumped back in William's old chair, the same one where he used to tell her stories when she was little. She closed her eyes and tried to remember his voice, the way he would laugh when she asked silly questions, the way he would ruffle her hair and call her his little dreamer. She wondered if she had been foolish to think that a mysterious key would somehow solve all her problems or bring back the happiness that seemed to have disappeared from her life. As she leaned back in the worn leather chair, something caught her attention. From this angle, she could see the bookshelf behind the desk more clearly than ever before. The afternoon light, grey and dim because of the rain, was hitting the books in a strange way. Emma sat up straighter and looked more carefully at the wall of books that had been there for as long as she could remember. One section of the bookshelf seemed different somehow. It appeared to stick out slightly from the wall, just by a few inches, but enough to create a shadow that Emma had never noticed before. Her heart began to race as she realized that this might not be an accident. She stood up quickly, knocking over a pencil holder in her excitement. Emma approached the bookshelf slowly, hardly daring to breathe. She ran her hands carefully along the books, feeling for anything unusual. Most of the volumes were old poetry collections and classic novels that William had loved to read. Her fingers moved from book to book, checking behind each one, until she reached a row of poetry books near the middle of the shelf, hidden behind a collection of poems by Robert Frost. Emma's fingers found something that made her gasp out loud. There, carved into the wood of the shelf itself, was a small keyhole that had been completely invisible from any other angle. It was so well hidden that someone could look at this bookshelf every day for years and never notice it was there. With trembling fingers that could barely hold the key steady, Emma inserted her grandfather's brass key into the hidden lock. For a moment, nothing happened, and Emma's heart sank with disappointment. But then she heard a soft click, and suddenly an entire section of the bookshelf began to swing inward like a secret door. Emma gasped and stepped backward in shock. She had seen secret passages in movies and read about them in adventure books, but she never imagined that her own grandfather had built one in his house. The opening revealed a small room that she never knew existed, a space that had been hidden behind the bookshelf for who knows how many years. As her eyes adjusted to the dim light inside the hidden room, Emma could hardly believe what she was seeing. The space was filled with musical instruments of every kind imaginable. There were guitars hanging on the walls, violins resting in cases, a small upright piano pushed against one wall, and other instruments that Emma couldn't even identify. All of them appeared to be handmade with incredible care and attention to detail. Sheet music covered every available surface in the room. There were compositions scattered on tables, pinned to walls and stacked in neat piles on shelves. But what caught Emma's attention most were the hundreds of letters that decorated the walls like wallpaper. They were letters from people Emma had never heard of, all addressed to her grandfather. With shaking hands, Emma picked up one of the letters and read it aloud to herself. "Dear William, your music helped me through the darkest time of my life. Thank you for sharing your gift with the world and for reminding me that beauty still exists." There were letters from hospitals where William had played for patients who were sick and scared. There were notes from nursing homes where he had brought joy and comfort to lonely elderly residents. There were thank you cards from schools where he had taught children to love music and believe in themselves. Emma realized with growing amazement that her grandfather had lived a completely different life than she had ever known about, a secret life dedicated to helping others through the power of music. In the center of the room, sitting on the small piano, was a piece of sheet music that made Emma's eyes immediately fill with tears. The title, written in William's careful handwriting, read, "Emma's Song, for my granddaughter, who has a voice the world needs to hear." Emma sat down at the piano bench with trembling legs and placed her fingers on the keys. Even though she had never learned to play piano properly, the melody seemed to flow naturally from her fingers. The music was beautiful and hopeful and somehow strangely familiar, as if she had been hearing it in her dreams her whole life. Emma threw herself into learning everything she could about music with a passion she had never felt for anything before in her life, every day after school. Instead of dreading the empty hours ahead of her, she would rush to her grandfather's secret room and spend hours teaching herself to play his handmade instruments. The guitars felt smooth and warm under her fingers, and the violins sang with a sweetness that seemed to come from years of love and care that William had put into making them. She found instruction books hidden among William's papers and taught herself to read music properly. The notes on the page began to make sense, like learning a new language that had always been waiting for her to discover it. Emma spent countless hours in the hidden room, finishing the songs that her grandfather had started but never completed. Each melody told a story, and Emma felt like she was having conversations with William through the music he had left behind. The most amazing discovery came when Emma decided to bring one of the guitars to visit her grandmother at the care home where Rose now lived. Emma had been nervous about playing in front of anyone, but something told her that her grandmother might enjoy hearing the music that William had loved so much. As soon as Emma began to play one of her grandfather's melodies, something magical happened. Rose's face, which had been blank and confused for weeks, suddenly lit up with recognition and joy. Her eyes became clear and focused in a way that Emma hadn't seen since before the dementia had taken hold of her mind. "Oh my," Rose whispered, and then she began to hum along with the tune. Her foot started tapping in time with the music, and for a few precious minutes, she seemed like the grandmother Emma remembered from her childhood. Music seemed to unlock memories that the terrible disease couldn't touch, bringing Rose back to herself in ways that medicine and therapy had failed to do. "You play just like him," Rose whispered one afternoon, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks as Emma finished a particularly beautiful song. "My William would be so proud of you, dear. He always knew you had something special inside you." Encouraged by her grandmother's response, Emma began to build up the courage to share her music with other people. She started by playing at the local coffee shop on Sunday afternoons. When the owner, Mr. Thomas, had said he was looking for some quiet background music. At first, Emma's hands would shake so badly she could barely hold the guitar, and her voice would wobble with nerves when she tried to sing. But gradually, week by week, she found her confidence growing. People in the small town of Millbrook started to notice Emma in a way they never had before. Instead of seeing her as the quiet girl who struggled in school and kept to herself, they began to recognize her as the young woman with the incredible musical gift who could make them feel things they hadn't felt in years. Customers at the coffee shop would request certain songs, and some would even come specifically on Sundays just to hear Emma play. Her parents, John and Margaret, watched in complete amazement as their daughter transformed before their eyes. Emma, who had always been shy and uncertain about everything, was becoming confident and sure of herself. Her grades at school improved dramatically as her self-confidence grew. She began to speak up in class, volunteer for presentations, and even made new friends who shared her newfound love of music. The most significant change came when Mrs. Patricia Davies, the owner of Rosewood Nursing Home, or where Rose lived, approached Emma after hearing her play for the residents one afternoon. Mrs. Davies was a kind woman in her 50s who had dedicated her life to caring for elderly people, and she had seen many volunteers come and go over the years. "You have something very special," Mrs. Davies told Emma after her first official performance at the nursing home. "The way you connect with people through music, the way you make them remember who they used to be, that's a rare gift that not everyone possesses." Emma began performing at the nursing home regularly, and she watched in wonder as residents who had been silent for months began to hum along with familiar songs from their youth. She saw people with dementia suddenly remember the words to lullabies they had sung to their children decades ago. She witnessed the way music could bring families together, helping them connect with loved ones when words fail. Through these experiences, Emma realized that music wasn't just about entertainment or showing off talent. It was about healing broken hearts, connecting people across generations, and bringing hope to people who needed it most. This was exactly what her grandfather had been doing all those years, using his gift to help others feel less alone in the world. Emma started writing her own songs about the things she had learned, about loss and grief, about hope and healing, about the power of human connection in a world that often felt cold and lonely. Each time she performed, whether at the coffee shop, the nursing home, or the community center, she felt more confident and more sure of her purpose. Each song she wrote seemed to help someone else feel less alone, and Emma began to understand that this was her grandfather's greatest gift to her, not just the music itself, but the knowledge that she could use her talents to make the world a better place. 1 year later, Emma stood in what had once been her grandfather's hidden secret room, but now looked completely different. The small, dusty space behind the bookshelf had been transformed into a bright, welcoming area that her family had decided to call William's music therapy room. The walls had been painted a cheerful yellow color, and proper lighting had been installed to make the space warm and inviting. All of William's handmade instruments were still there, but now they were displayed properly and used regularly to bring joy to people who needed it most. Emma had grown and changed so much over the past 12 months that sometimes she hardly recognized herself. The shy, uncertain girl who had once felt invisible at school was now a confident young woman with a clear sense of purpose and direction in her life. She had discovered not just her grandfather's hidden talents, but her own as well, and she was using them to make a real difference in the world around her. 3 times a week, Emma would carefully pack her favorite instruments into their cases and make the short journey to Rosewood Care Home, where her grandmother Rose now lived in a comfortable room with a view of the garden. Emma had become a regular volunteer at the facility, working with elderly residents who suffered from dementia, depression, and the loneliness that often comes with old age. She helped them remember songs from their youth, taught them simple melodies on easy instruments, and created new memories through the power of music. The work was sometimes challenging, but it was also the most rewarding thing Emma had ever done. In her life, she watched residents who had been silent for months suddenly start singing along to songs they had learned as children. She saw people with advanced dementia light up with recognition when they heard familiar tunes from their past. Most importantly, she witnessed families reconnecting with loved ones through shared musical experiences that transcended the barriers created by illness and age. Dr. James Harrison, the facility director at Rosewood Care Home, had been impressed with Emma's natural abilities from the very beginning. He was a kind man in his 60s who had spent his entire career working with elderly people, and he recognized something special in the way Emma connected with the residents. Music therapy is a real profession, Emma, Dr. Harrison had explained to her during one of their regular meetings. What you're doing here isn't just volunteering or being kind to old people. You have a natural talent for using music to heal and help others, and there are college programs that can teach you how to do this professionally. Emma had been amazed to learn that she could actually make a career out of something she loved so much. With Dr. Harrison's help and recommendation, she had applied for and received a scholarship to study music therapy at the local community college. The program would allow her to continue living at home and working with the residents at Rosewood while pursuing her degree, which seemed like the perfect arrangement for everyone involved. The best news of all was that the old family house didn't need to be sold after all. When Emma's parents, John and Margaret, saw how their daughter had been transformed by discovering her grandfather's legacy, they realized that the house was too important to let go. They had watched Emma blossom from a struggling and happy teenager into a confident young woman with clear goals and a bright future ahead of her. Today was particularly special because Emma was preparing to perform at the Care Home's monthly concert, an event that brought together residents, their families, and staff members for an afternoon of music and celebration. Emma had spent weeks preparing for this performance because she planned to debut the completed version of Emma's song, the piece that her grandfather had started writing for her but had never been able to finish. The main recreation room at Rosewood had been decorated with colorful balloons and flowers for the occasion. Folding chairs had been ranged in neat rows, and a small stage area had been set up at the front of the room. Emma's grandmother Rose sat in the front row, wearing her best blue dress and a bright smile that reminded Emma of the woman she had been before the dementia had begun to steal her memories. As Emma took her place at the piano, She looked out at the audience of about 50 people who had gathered to hear her play. There were residents in wheelchairs, family members who had come to visit their loved ones, and staff members who had finished their shifts but had stayed to enjoy the music. The room felt warm and full of love. Exactly the kind of atmosphere that a grandfather would have enjoyed. Emma placed her fingers on the piano keys and began to play the melody that had become so familiar to her over the past year. As the first notes filled the room, she began to sing the words that William had written specifically for her, words that had taken on new meaning as she had grown and learned about herself. The song spoke about finding courage when you feel afraid, about discovering talents you never knew you had, and about using your gifts to help others find hope in difficult times. The end.